I suppose, just as there's genealogy, there's also a continuity of story and imaginations. I see myself as an extension of my own father and his history and how he was born and cultivated in at the age of 8 until 11 in a concentration camp by a professor of literature and grammar, and his hopes and ambitions which were shattered, and how he and his family were turned away from the coast of Haifa, went to France, and then finally immigrated to Australia on boats and were refugees in Australia until he became a doctor and a surgeon and grew a family of 6. For me, as the youngest of 6 children in a highly enlightened academic, intellectual and scientific family, I decided, obviously subconsciously, to undertake a journey, an adventure of my own, maybe in compensation for my father's absence of this freedom to journey and explore. And where does one go? I suppose to the Holy Land, to the Promised Land, to explore the potential for great idealism, utopia, the ultimate. Where else should one go other than to the pen ultimate? And so my journey was one of the practicalism of my father, who educated me, and the fantasy of where one can go if one chooses and imagines. And I was brought up on fantasy literature. I remember the books of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, who only later I discovered was a Oxford Don and a theologian who was really truly writing about the potential for fantasy in a children's series. So that, with the gambit of psychological, philosophical, historical literature that I was exposed to, and I merged, then exploring governance, political science, how to practically go about and engineer a utopia, and the Congress or the Sanhedrin or the Senate or the upper house or various organizations that could bring about this utopian fantasy. They were part of my education. That's why I went to Cambridge to do a postdoctorate in innovative governance. But I couldn't make a breakthrough. Not in religious observance, not in intellectual political science, and so I abandoned it. And it goes to demonstrating another level on the trajectory of the homo religiosus, the religious explorer, the open-minded explorer, where I could not make any progress. I could not see an ideal government on the horizon. So I abandoned it to selfishness, to egoism, to cultivating what one wants without having to be an example. And interestingly, within this general framework, I ended up in China. and saw the development of another type of civilization, which was connected to images and pictures without the abstractizing process which occurred in the West through the ages of the alphabet. And this also added some dimensions to my thinking. But again, I was really lost. No headway, apart from draconian or despotic or practical leadership, which really abandoned the individual and took advantage of the individual. There seemed to be no other good possibility until the age of artificial intelligence. So for me, the entire scenery changed when there seemed to be a technology at hand that could change the cards, change the reality. But I didn't realize this at first. I suppose another stage in my development was personal problems, life problems, challenges, legal problems, threats, all sorts of also sad events, like the passing of my father, and realizing that I would have to deal with issues alone and to learn the tools of survival outside of fantasy, and realizing how difficult that is, and how many challenges and how many obstacles are put in front of people, not for any objective reason, but to create advantage for one group or another. And then to see and hear and get advice, some good advice and some out of date, irrelevant observations and advice, and to realize that the effect of doing one thing as opposed to another can create different realities, and that some people don't have the right advice or the timely advice, or the effects of bad advice would bring them down more quickly than others. So then to take the reality that I knew, and then to apply it to a reality where one is the solely responsible to see it through and to be successful. So I realized that one of the greatest obstacles to individual empowerment is no other than government. The government is, to my virgin impressions of seeking to follow through on one's will freely, the government is the major obstacle. Not only an obstacle, they're vandals. The almost inability of a free and independent and imaginative person to put into process just simply what they wish to do, which is positive, is a great challenge. So I'm looking at the world almost afresh, realizing that it is my duty as an individual, as a fellow journeyer, to make an impression on the reality and to move forward, and then to see that there are obstacles, there are pressures stopping or preventing or vandalizing or misguiding the person through tollways, through ways which are they're instructed, or they are public institutions, or they're businesses, but the free traversing of the individual across the plasma of reality to form their own reality with other people of their choosing in a free and unpestered way, that to my first impressions was not as simple as one would think it should be. And so my conclusion is that this is because there are interests at hand which are preventing it. And another thought that was very important for me during a period of time that I was very interested in physics and quantum physics is the idea of entropy. That every power will leave a secondary power which would appear to be chaotic, but is really the imprint, the stored or condensed or changed form of an event in another language or energy form. And this is what was discovered in the Hawking points, that a black hole would leave a energy trace, a signature. And so everything analogous to this would leave a signature in another way. And the work of a thinker, of an enlightened physicist, is to understand the energy signatures and to understand what must have been in order to create it, and to use to recreate and to reform and to refine and to move on, and as enlightened thinkers. And so that is my goal as a social thinker, to deploy the knowledge of science within the context of social reality for the betterment of the individual.